I know there's someone out there like me that names their files as so. Client underscore, why is everything always an underscore? Why is it client underscore final project? So like you do final project and then like an error happens or you get client revisions and you're like, whatever, it's only gonna be 2 rounds of revisions. And it's now client underscore project 1 final 1. Then you get more revisions. You're like, well, I mean, they're a nice client, so I'll do 1 more. And then it ends up being final. And then maybe there's a crash and it stops working. And then it's final. And then eventually you just start putting like, send help, please, final.jpg. We've all been there. What's going on, guys? My name is Chris Howe. In this week's episode, we're gonna be talking about light painting, which is one of my favorite techniques for car photography. This is the best way to get the ultimate car photo. So I'm gonna show you how to create an image like this one. Okay, so before we jump into the steps, what is light painting? Essentially, when you set your camera up on a tripod and go for a long exposure and you move a light source through that frame, you can actually paint with light. So typically people do this to illuminate an object or create art just out of that light source. So for car photography specifically, we are going to use this light source to highlight multiple parts of the car and then stack those images and then pick the parts that we really like to create our final shot. All right, so let's talk about gear for light painting. You actually don't need much. Number 1, you need a tripod. 2, a camera body. 3, a lens. Next is some sort of light source. And in our case, we used a giant selfie stick to bring that light nice and high over that G-Wagon, but you don't really need a selfie stick. This was just an extra piece that helped make the job a bit easier. Now, before we start shooting, I would recommend shooting at night. If you did want to try to shoot in the day, you'll have to use some sort of ND, but I've always noticed that doesn't really produce the best results. Where it looks really, really good is at night. Okay, now the fun part, we actually get to go and start shooting. So you need to find yourself a location and a cool car to shoot. It can be any car, it doesn't have to be cool. It could be a lame car, but kind of make for a lame photo. In this instance, we'll be using an Arctic white G-Wagon in front of an ice garage. Definitely a very unique combination. All right, next you got to search for a composition that you like and then lock it off on a tripod and make sure you do not move that tripod one bit. Not this little bit and you're like, oh, maybe I can get away with it. No, don't move it at all. So this is the composition that we landed on. We have the ice garage on the one side, we have the car on the other side, and we are going to take our first base photo. Now what we did in this instance is that we exposed for the headlights and the ice garage, and that was going to be our base level. Now for camera sanities, what I recommend is bring your ISO as low as it possibly can to the point where you can bring your shutter to around 10 seconds. If you're like an athlete runner, then maybe 5 seconds, maybe 2 seconds works for you. You can just through the frame. But I'm a little slower. 10 seconds works. What we're gonna do is take a multitude of photos. Essentially what you're trying to do is highlight different parts of the car with your light source. So for my second photo, my second layer, I like to start with the light source going over top of the car. So what I did is I took this photo stick, I attached it to the selfie stick, and what I did is I actually walked it right over top of the car. Now a little pro tip is set a self timer for about 2 to 5 seconds, and then that gives you enough time to hear doot, 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 doot. And when that shutter is open, you can start walking through your frame with that light source at a nice steady pace right over top of the car to highlight the frame, catch a little of that rim light, and start to light this car up. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna walk right out of the frame, take a quick look at that image, and that first shot looks pretty good. Now, what you probably noticed when you looked at that photo is that there's a giant streak of light in the sky. Do not freak out. The only thing that you need to pay attention to is that the light source, that little streak, is not touching any part of the car. If it is, reshoot that photo and give yourself a little bit more distance above the car. All right, I'm gonna go through the next part a little quickly. What we wanna do is capture a couple of other frames to highlight different parts of the car with that light source. I always make sure that I highlight the wheels. What you're gonna do is go stand beside the wheel and create a circular motion above the wheel. Again, make sure that that light source is not touching the wheel, and that should hit the rubber on the rim. It should highlight some of the spokes. It should highlight the brakes, and that's gonna be one of the frames that you use to make that wheel pop in your image. So use these techniques to highlight the front emblem, the front of the car, maybe the back of the car. We actually do an entire frame where we don't light it with the light source and we just hold on the brake so that you can have that red brake light bouncing off the snow or whatever your location is. We also do a frame where we take that light source, put it right underneath the car to illuminate the bottom part, and then I'll kind of just run through the frame to accentuate some of the little parts like maybe the exhaust, maybe the door handle, maybe there's something inside the car that you want to light up. Really, you're just trying to bring out out all the details in this car and capture enough photos so that you have options later in Photoshop for the details that you want to highlight. All right, so half of our work is done. It's now time to bring those photos into your computer and start that edit. Before I open Photoshop, I like to pick the different images that I'm going to be using for my layers. All right, so what I like to do is import all those photos into Lightroom so I can see those shots and then organize them so then I can bring those photos in a stack later into Photoshop. So it starts on this image where we have our base layer, where we have our exposure set for the headlights and that ice garage in the background. We start to move through those photos. We have our first exposure. That looks really good. As you can see, there's a light streak in the sky. I'll show you how to mask that out later. And then we have our brake lights at the back. Those look really, really good, so we can mask that in. I wanted to show you an example of when the light is actually touching the part of the car that we're trying to highlight. You wouldn't want to use this image, so you always want to make sure that you have one shot at least that's not touching the part of the car that you're trying to highlight. As you can see right here, the light is actually touching the rubber on the wheel, and we actually can't use that later because the exposure wouldn't be even. I'd like to apologize for our neighbor. He decided, hey, I know Chris is shooting a light painting tutorial, but I would love to vacuum right now. It's like what I do 4:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'm like, oh, this is my jam. This is how I relieve stress, is vacuuming during my neighbor's YouTube video. Here we have the exposure underneath the car. That's just a cool one that we can use later. That's again a personal choice if you want to use this. I like using it because it makes the car look super epic. As you can see here, the exhaust on this car is in front of the wheel, and it's actually causing a bit of softness around the tires and the rims. We couldn't turn the car off. We were told not to, and obviously it's super cold outside. So this is one of those things that you'll have to live with, but I would just say it's moody. Here's another photo of lighting the front of the car. I think that looks really nice. And those are our 8 images. So I'm gonna go into Lightroom. I picked the 8 shots that I like, and I've organized, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm gonna do final selects. And we're gonna go image format. We're gonna select original so that you actually get those raw files so that you can stack those later on. Now, again, this is just my process. This is how I like to work. There's probably a lot of different ways that you can do this. This is the way that just makes sense to me. Follow whatever process works for you for stacking in Photoshop later on. I'm going to start my sequence as number 1, custom name sequence. So we have Mercedes G-Wagon raw, and it's gonna create Mercedes G-Wagon raw 1. So we know that that's our base layer shot, and we're gonna export. All right, let's open up Photoshop. We're gonna go down to File. We're gonna go to Scripts. We're gonna go Load Files into Stack. This is the way that you'll be able to actually mask the images the way that you want to. You're gonna browse for that folder that you just created. So we're gonna go into Final Select. I like to click Attempt to automatically align source images just in case for whatever reason you knocked your tripod just a little bit. This way they'll all line up properly. And we're gonna wait 9,000 years for this to load. 2016 MacBook, we all know. All right, we're gonna turn off all those layers. All right, we're gonna turn on our second layer and start creating a mask here to mask in the light on this car. I'm going to invert the mask so that we can actually paint in the color that we like. We're gonna grab our brush tool, which the hotkey for that is B, and we're gonna start masking in parts of this car. Already going from base layer to first image. Our next layer, we have our brake lights. So let's mask that in. Again, create a mask. We're going to invert that mask so that we can paint in that red light. Woo! That's looking nice. That's looking so good. So this next layer is actually the shot of the emblem. So we're gonna do a quick masking just on that emblem, and I'll show you the difference when you mask that in. And that's the difference with accentuating the front of the car and grabbing those details. That looks a lot better. All right, our next one, we did just the wheels. So let's mask that again. This is where the details are gonna pop. Again, you can play with your mask to really fine tune this a little bit. I think that looks pretty sweet. Let's see that from each layer going from base layer all the way to adding things on. That looks pretty sweet. I'm really happy with that. That's just 8 images stacked together to create our final composition. And then we can bring that back into Lightroom and do our final grade, which we'll do right now. So that's our rough final composition. Obviously, I would spend more than 10 minutes stitching this together. And that ground in the front of the car doesn't look the best. I might actually even send this off to a photo editor just to like clean up the snow in front of it to really perfect it. Honestly, I'll probably find somebody on Fiverr to do this job. All right, that's like a pretty sweet final image. This is a pretty simple technique that is extremely powerful. If you guys use this technique, please tag me in your shots and I'll do my best to comment on them. I think it's always fun to see what you guys create after seeing a tutorial like this. If you guys are curious about the gear I used, I've linked all of it below. If you guys want to try to do this on a budget, I've included a few more affordable options to get the same type of result. And on that note, big thank you to Mercedes-Benz for inviting us out to Gimli to play with all their super fun cars, including this Arctic White G-Wagon, which is actually my dream car. Also, please comment your dream cars below. What would be in your ice garage? If you guys saw any value in this video, please press like, go and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified for future videos. Go down there, have fun, just go and explore. There's so many different buttons, press them all, except the one that says dislike. Don't ever press that one, please. This is my career in your hands, guys. If you press dislike, I melt. I go, no! Don't want me to melt. Come on. I love you. See you later. I really like this car a lot. I just like a lot. I don't want to give it back. I want it. I'm just gonna take the key. Where'd the key go? Oh, you know what would be really helpful? Every single one of you watch this video 1,000 to 10,000 times each, and just maybe I have enough ad revenue to put a down payment on something like this. So if you guys could do that just in the back, like you're working, and then you can just mute me, but my video is still playing. Like I know it will eat up all your data and you'll have to pay like overages and stuff like that, but like I'll send you pictures of my G-Wagon. This is so stupid.